All right, hi guys. I'm Ron McCants. I'm the founder of the Parity Project. What we do here is we're a community of Black entertainment professionals who are fighting for racial parity and economic equity in entertainment. And this goes for writers, directors, editors, representatives, executives, everybody, because it's going to take all of us to improve the condition and our stories. We have this panel series, Breaking into the Industry and Changing the Game. We created it because we want to create more producers who are Black. We want more gatekeepers who are Black, right? Who will champion lots of different stories. We, at the Parity Project, we have, a podcast that we'd love for you to take a listen to, rate it, donate, whatever it is. We want your support in order to kind of make everything that we do institutionalized. We're supported by the Writers Guild Foundation. So any contributions you make are 501c3 and are tax deductible. So I want to also thank Derek Garlington, Nicole Thompson, Davida, Chanel Smith, and Ramphis Myrtle for all the help in developing this producer series. The next one is going to be in November. I also want to thank our panelists here today, Avril, Kate, and Leah. I want to thank Johnny at Chicken Bone. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Davida and Ramphis. Oh, after I tell you guys how I broke in. And I broke in through the Disney ABC writing program. Okay, cool.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, my name is Ramphis Myrtle. I am a New York-based filmmaker. I predominantly produce films around people of color, women, and the queer community. I also speak all around the world and consult filmmakers. How I got my big break is after I self-funded my second short, I was dabbling in real estate, and I went to a real estate convention. Long story short, I didn't get involved in that. And I approached this real estate investor, asked him if he would be interested in getting involved in film. He rejected my approach, but he said, hey, I have a friend that's in real estate that you should know. He gave me her name. I looked her up on LinkedIn, reached out to her, and we got together for drinks. She was putting together a show called What's Cooking in Real Estate, where you cook to a meal, toast to a deal. And we met, we spoke about the project. She had shot a pilot. And then she brought me on to do the second and third, episodes. And through that is where I found my first, real estate, investors that were open to investing in film. And they got involved with a film of mine. It's called Love in a Small Print, which later got into Cannes. And the doors kind of opened, after that. So that's how I broke in the industry. And I will pass the mic to Davida.
Good morning and happy Saturday. I am Davida Chanel Smith. I'm a talent manager and producer. And I got my big break when I was working a job where I felt uncreative, unmotivated, uninspired. And I read an article about Charles King and all that he was doing in representation. And that was my big break because it gave me just a different thought process of what careers were available in the industry behind the scenes. I had never wanted to act for real. So just seeing someone having such a successful career, helping guide the careers of others was inspiring to me. So I count that as one of my many big breaks. And my full circle moment was that my first film credit was a movie that he was helping to produce. So that felt really well. But I know you didn't come here today to hear about me. I am overly ecstatic to present this panel today. We have three amazing women doing great things in the industry who have, I'm sure, done something over the last couple of years that most of us have seen. So I'm kind of fangirling out. I want to get started with them. Kate, could you tell us how you got your big break?
Yeah, sure. I would say it was when I sort of made the decision from living in New York City for 15 years to making the move to LA. And I came out here with a director that I produced. He got into the MFA program at AFI. And so I sort of started to help him on his projects. And it was through those experiences of collaborating with my first LA tribe that I sort of to really find my voice as a producer.
Great, great. Avril, same question.
Hi, thank you for having me today, first of all. So I think my first big break, I would say, was the day I decided to stop straddling the fence. I had spent about 11 or so years as a college professor, and I was also, doing being an independent filmmaker at the same time. And so I was trying to do both. And then I think around in 2016, I just didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to do both, and I quit my teaching job, and I decided to produce a little film called Gin. And that film went on to win a jury award at South by Southwest. It premiered there, it played internationally, and everything kind of took off from there.
Yeah, and it won my heart. I don't know if it counts as much
Thank
as the
you.
festivals, but it did.
It does.
And
Thank you.
last but not least, Leah, what's your story? How did you get your big break? Oh, you're on mute.
Well, that doesn't help, right? I'm going to date myself a little bit, and I'm going to say that when I graduated school, I did the big move. I went out to LA. I went to school in New York. I'm from New York. I didn't know anybody, and SAG happened to be on strike that year, so there was no work. I had about a year's worth of money saved to go do it. My dad was like, hey, I got your back for a year. And there was no work. And one of the articles I read while I was out there was about Gwyneth Paltrow talking about how she got her big break. And as I understood that story, she had a role that was in a film that Steven Spielberg was directing because that was her godfather. And her father was Bruce Paltrow, and her mother was Blythe Danner, an actress that I had, long time admired. And
Oh,
I don't hear.
I think we're having a bit of a frozen moment. At the
Is
best
she
part
still
of the
there?
story.
I
Okay.
know.
She's still there. Well, let's come back. Let's
All
come
right.
back.
So Ramses, why don't you go ahead with the next question and we'll pick up on Leah's story.
Okay, cool. Well, all three of you wear, a lot of different hats. I'm going to ask each three of you, different questions about those hats. Kate, let's start with you first. You started, acting in New York, and how does that, acting background influence your work as a director or producer, all the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, the main skill that came from was just how to break down a story and really understand characters. So I think the tool that I use most from the acting days is when I'm, helping writers and giving script notes, and also when I'm on set with my directors, if they're just not getting that thing that they want, sometimes I can give them some advice on how to speak actor. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, Avril, I've learned that, you're directing now, directing a lot more now. And, you're producing, directing, you have a educational background. And how has that, informed you on what projects to take and the influence on the work and how you do your work as a former educator?
Yeah. So I think that my previous work as an educator, I used to teach a little bit of everything. I taught film, and so I taught, production, but I also taught theory as well. So I taught, history of cinema and things like that. So that taught me to really study film. And so I think when it comes to choosing projects to work on, I kind of come from this background, like this academic background of analyzing film and being really critical about the images that we see on the screen. And so I think it definitely informs, what projects I choose and what work I tend to get excited about, because my passion is for those unique stories that are, championing or highlighting those voices that we don't typically get to hear from, and that are also challenging stereotypes. And so I think a lot of my work, both, when I was in school as a student and then even as a professor, just trying to, encourage my students to always think critically about the work that they were doing, it just helps inform, what I what I gravitate toward as a producer as well. So yeah, I wear many hats in terms of, you know, I have that sort of academic side of me. And then there's the producing, and then there's also the directing as well. And I think that they all kind of feed into each other. I spent time as an editor as well, which also, you know, it's like as a director to know how I'm editing everything together. Like I have the edit in my head, so I know what we need to shoot. So it's like everything informs the other. Same thing with directing. I find that producing projects and working with directors and helping them hone their vision and supporting that vision it's helpful to have a background in directing, so that because I understand the dynamics of story and what's important, and especially it's especially useful on set when you have to make those like critical decisions on the spot. So it all comes together.
Wow. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Thank you for that deep share. Is Leah back on? Do we see her? Oh, she's Ramphis Myrtle again. Leah, can you unmute?
I am unmuting and I am changing name, and I apologize.
It's Mercury in retrograde or something, shadow, something's happening. So we thank everybody, because we've all been dealing with technological issues in this new age. So
apologies. I was simply saying, so what I realized was that this business was about relationships. And I didn't really know how LA worked, but I knew how New York worked because that's where I was from. So I moved back. I got an internship that led to a job at Revolution Studios that then turned into me leaving from there after recognizing a few. What I learned at Revolution was that the producer has way more, not just power, but also that they have the ability to sort of insert change, to intervene in standardized thought processes, whether it's if the script doesn't mention a person of color, if there's no one on the cast, there's no one, you know, just the directors that you choose. And so that led me into a complete understanding of what that job was that I actually previously had no understanding. But I knew that I wanted to do that. I wanted to be someone who was a little bit more disruptive in the space. And that thankfully led me over to a non-for-profit that taught young filmmaking to young people. And then also, but more importantly for me, the business side of filmmaking. And we're 20 years running and on that endeavor. And from there, I started making my own projects. And I guess the big break, because that was like the first mental break. And I don't mean break like, but break open, not break down, break open. And then the second industry break was the first film I put out. 25 to Life went on to win ABFF, and all doors happened to open from there.
Awesome. I'm actually going to ask you another question, Leah. So you graduated from Tisch with an MA, which is extremely competitive. And I believe you started as an actress. You know, how did you transition into that producing? And the second part of the question, you know, going to such a prestigious institution, you know, it provided you, you know, a strong network. You know, going to NYU, was that a big difference, you know, with your career and how you were able to move fluidly?
Yeah, I would say, so I went to NYU for both my BFA and my MA. So I went there as an undergrad. I studied drama and politics. I double majored while I was there. And it was an amazing, you know, it was an amazing place. I had amazing cohorts. I had amazing people to then turn around and tap into once I left and went out into the world. When I went to the nonprofit to go teach filmmaking to young people, I did not come from a background of social work or social justice or anything like that. You know, have always been an activist in my heart, but never sort of in theory, study, practice. And I went back to school to get an MA in art and public policy because the work that I had been doing, I realized had larger implications, both for the footprint I was leaving in young people's lives, and I wanted to be more conscious about how that was happening, and then also for the art that I was creating. I knew what I was drawn to, but I wanted to have a deeper level of intentionality as I was doing it. And what that program allowed me to do was to coalesce around the idea that I'm not one thing. I am all the things and all the experiences, and I bring all those things to bear at each and every conversation, and how I am able to pull together a crew and a team and talent how I assess material. And so it has proven to be the bedrock of everything I've done since then, because before I did it kind of like out of instinct, out of gut. And now I approach it with the combination of both and an underlying sort of non-fear factor, right? The biggest thing I think we can ever do is intervene. It's not really so much about having a seat at the table. It's about understanding that you're building a table of your own. And that requires a fortitude that people sometimes take a long time to come to. And I know it took me time, but that's what I really got out of that experience.
Wow, that was really powerful. Davida, I'll pass the baton on to you.
Yeah, extremely powerful. And on that note, speaking about like just building yourself up and stepping into those spaces, those things require resources. April, as an educator and from a background of, you know, pushing your students to do these things, what are some of the great resources that you think are available to people aspiring for a filmmaking career or an entertainment-based career?
I think some of the greatest resources are those local organizations that are designed to help people get into the film business, that are designed to help people network. And so those organizations, you know, there's IFP on, you know, in New York, there's Film Independent if you're on the West Coast, you know, in LA. And then if you're in San Francisco, there's San Francisco Film Society. And then I also, you know, in every state has a film commission. States have a film commission, you know, certain cities have their own film commission. For me, that's always a good starting point. I think in every area, you know, that's a good starting point is organizations like that. And then once you kind of get plugged in those areas, typically what happens is they start to kind of let you know about other opportunities and other organizations that are in that vicinity as well. So there may be some, you know, smaller organizations that are even more localized that you can, again, get plugged in and you can, you know, network and find your tribe, you know what I mean? And so I always push toward those organizations because I feel like that's a really good starting point, as well as film commissions, because they're localized to your local community.
Thank you so much. And that encourages us to start where we are. You don't have to move to LA and New York. And then Kate, you mentioned at the top having come to LA with a friend who was working with AFI and then having some experiences with AFI. Can you talk about the resources they offer or your experience with those resources?
Yeah, I think a great place is to look to the grad schools that are in your areas or in the bigger markets. So with that, my friend Jeremy Merrifield was getting his MFA in directing at AFI. So I was like, yeah, I'll come work on your stuff. But what we didn't realize is there's not enough producers in the actual program to produce everything that needs to be done for the first and second year MFA programs. So over the course of the 2 years that he was there, I was able to sort of piggyback onto those productions and produce around 7 shorts. And that's where I finally figured out, oh, all of these hats I've been wearing, this hat should work. Like, this is what's working. This is, you know, going to South by, going to Sundance, it like just ignited everything. So I would definitely say, look to where you can volunteer and just, you know, pull up your sleeves and jump in. And I think the grad programs are a good place because those programs are really focused. I think some undergraduate film programs, it's about giving you a taste of everything. But when you go into the graduate level, then it's really laser pointing in. And since they do need a lot of outside help, you don't necessarily have to be enrolled and paying to go to actually benefit from the lessons that you can learn on set there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And then Leah, in that same vein of things, as a producer, where are some of the places you go or some of the resources you use to find your actors, maybe some writers you want to work with? What are some resources that have helped you out in that way?
So I like to say that I stay in the street, right? And And I do that because most other people don't have the time to. And that's where we are. That's where the new next person who does not have access to resources really is. They're struggling. They may be, you know, driving a bus, waiting tables, but at night they're staying up, you know, between, you know, midnight and 3 working on their script. So I like to talk to grad students, certainly. Do a lot of networking opportunities. I go to Sundance every year, mainly to hang out. You know, I might see some films, but mainly to meet the people that actually took the time to save the money for the ticket and got there, figured it out somehow, because that also is a certain level of drive that has to be sort of, you know, lifted up. But I stay open. I mentor. I've been mentoring 3 people for the past 15 years. And I stay having meetings with other people that have some young person in their life that is thinking about film but has no way in, has no idea of like who to talk to. That keeps me understanding how film is being looked at generationally. Because the person who asked me that question 5 years ago is not the same person 10 years ago, is not the same person 15 years ago. They all have different points of access and interest and things that they want to say through film and through cinema. So, you know, I would say that's like the biggest way. I'm always quick to I've had the same phone number since I was 20. And so I like to be able to have people, you know, pass that along so that I can take the 30 minutes, meet you and say, hey, I may not have anything for you right now, but I think I know somebody who might, and to just keep that Rolodex going.
Thank you so much. Rampus?
Awesome. That's beautiful. Kate, this is specifically for you. We had a conversation a few months ago about the AFI program, and part of this, you know, panel today is, you know, how to get work, how to build a pipeline. And you talked to me about 2 or 3 ways that filmmakers can get involved with, you know, producing AFI shorts. And we just wanted you to share that, elaborate, you know, like what are the steps, what are the guidelines in case, you know, anyone that's on, you know, this video call with us tonight wants to be involved in that world, and, you know, they want to, they're in LA, or, you know, they want to come to LA and produce AFI shorts, because I think that's a great pipeline. I think it's definitely life-changing, and you've had extreme success that way. So please feel free to share as much as you are able to about that program or the programs.
Yeah, so actually I can dump it into the chat. There's 2 ways. There's the MFA program, but then there's also the directing workshop for women. So with MFA program, her name's Asia Coleman, and I'm gonna send this now, and it tells you what she needs. And then also the Directing Women's Workshop, where they take, I think, about 8 or 6 up and coming female directors. At the start of that program, they will do sort of a town hall pitch session where anyone can go and sit in the audience and hear the 8 different projects and decide if they want to approach one of those directors with whatever skill that you have. So if you are a producer, or you want to be a producer and you want to be a coordinator on set, you would then have an opportunity to say, hey, I want to help on your project. And that was actually how I did the first project at AFI. It was called Unspeakable, and that ended up going to South by Southwest. So I hope those 2 things will help.
Awesome. Any recommends on, you know, like when they email or reach out, you know, like how should they reach out? Or
well, yes. So I just dropped in the chat. So when you're reaching out to Asia for the MFA program, she wants your contact information, your resume, as well as what you specifically want to accrue on there. And I would say, if you are a person who hasn't been on a film set or hasn't produced, I would definitely look at your what you have done, what your work history is, and find the skills, like highlight the skills that would lend well to what you would offer to a set. Like, have you been a server? Then you know how to think about a million different things happening at once, and those make great production assistants and eventually great producers. So I think kind of take a think about what your skills are that you have and highlight those skills in your resume if you're starting from sort of ground zero. And then for the Directing Women's Workshop, I would say email that dwwinfo@afi.com and just say, hey, can I get on the mailing list for when the pitch happens for your incoming class?
Okay, so they can email that anytime. Now with Asia, is there a time you recommend? Like, can they reach out now or should they wait? Like, what's the time period in terms of?
I would reach out now because they have productions that go year round, basically. So I think whenever you're ready, there isn't necessarily a time.
Okay, all right. Wow, that's a big gem you just shared. Thank you so much, Kate. That's awesome. This is kind of like the things that you don't know, and this gives access. And I think, I know half the battle is always showing up. So, anyone that's interested, please jump on, this opportunity. Now, with that said, I want to kind of go back to what Leah was talking about in terms of mentorship. This is actually for, Avril first. Mentorship and networking are cornerstones in basically building, the careers in this business. And, when you, were moving up in your career, did you have mentors? Do you still have mentors now? Are you more of a mentee? Like, what does that look like and how important is that?
It's very important. I have mentors now. I mentor some people, but I also have my own mentors. I think for me, starting out, I had a couple of mentors that, and they were people who, again, were kind of in that academic space, who that was kind of like their area of expertise. But I didn't really have a lot of mentors in the, production world. It was something that was so new to me that I really wish that I had more mentors in that space when I was in college and, when I was an undergrad. And even in grad school, I went to film school at Columbia University, and, I wish that I had more mentors there. So I definitely, am kind of flipping that script, and I have a lot of mentors in my life now who I call on quite often to just help out and help me answer questions or just help me process through things. And then in the same regard, there are people that, again, I work very closely with those organizations like IFP and San Francisco Film Society, and they have mentee programs that I, connect with them and have, mentees through that, where I try to do the same thing and kind of pay it forward. But mentorship I can't stress how important it is, especially I'll say as someone who, has been a professor, it's very difficult to, like I was saying before, like I straddled both sides of the fence of like being an independent filmmaker and also being in the classroom. And it's a challenge to do that, to work both sides of the fence. And I think one thing that's great about mentors is these are people who are in the field like all the time and who know what's going on and what's current. And they're just able to kind of have an ear to the ground about, this business changes so fast. Technology changes, we're in this digital age where streaming and digital and all of that is king now. So everything changes very quickly. And one thing I love about mentors and also about mentoring others is that, mentors are the ones who are doing it and who are in the trenches and are able to keep you up to date on what's going on and share their real life experiences. So it's very helpful, I think, on both sides, both to have mentors and also to mentor.
Nuggets. I'm loving these nuggets today. All right. Well, the next question's for you, Leah. Networking and connecting with people can be really difficult and challenging, number one. And number two, I wanted to ask, what's the most, challenging part about building a network and finding work?
Money, right? Being able to, I mean, I made it my business to go to everything and to take the time to remember your birthday, remember where your kids go to school, remember the last project you're going on, did it get into that festival, did you, and to send a Christmas card and all of those other things. And whenever there were gaps in between, it was when I didn't have the extra 150 to send all those Christmas cards, buy them plus stamps, right? So, to me, there's a relationship between both of those things, like the person that you're intending to be, and how you can best be that given the resources you have at hand. But those moments have been the things that have absolutely changed a lot of like where I am now, for example, from starting out, though everybody grows with you. And all those people end up in different jobs and different places and different whatever have yous. And someone you might have met who was also interning at some other, at some cocktail thing that you went to, or some, talk back or panel or something like that. That person now is a VP at Universal, or has already started their own nonprofit or whatever have you. So I think the biggest thing for, that in terms of like getting work is now having people to send that work to. And that relationship got started so long ago, and we rode that wave sort of together. But I think that I would absolutely have to say, I mean, those first, and I'll call them 5 years, were incredibly difficult. How do you balance out rent versus this, or your job where you're working like this and going to that? How do you, I remember one time I got an internship for a young woman with Spike Lee, and her mom told her not to take it because she wanted her to get a job. She had gotten a job at Applebee's, and she wanted her to be able to put work experience on her resume. That sort of trying to figure out how to quantify what is actually going to help you long term, what is actually going to be the foundation underneath your feet to be the person you want to be, versus real life practicalities is incredibly hard. And so, that's what I would absolutely say, is that those are the two places that make networking both the best thing, but also the hardest thing, is that trade-off and like how you actually find sustainability.
That's very real and very well said. Now, Kate, I'm going to ask you, like you were in New York, you came to LA, how did you maneuver? Did you have to start from scratch, building a network, in different areas of filmmaking? Like, how did you maneuver around all of that?
Well, it took me about 5 years to make the decision to come out to LA, because you always hear that adage of don't go to LA unless you have a job. So once I had the opportunity where most of my friends were coming out to LA, that's when I sort of took it. So upon coming to LA, I had not only my friend Jeremy, who was in AFI, but I did also have a network of other writers and actually actors that I had known from New York who had made the move years before me. So it was almost like coming back to my people, because they had all left New York over those 15 years that I was there. So yeah, I don't know, in this industry, I don't feel like you're ever starting back from square one, because I think you're always building on the relationships. Just like Leo was saying, how you don't know where that one friend is going to be 5 years from now, and an actor is now a director, and I think everyone's just constantly evolving. So I think you're always constantly building and not ever starting from square one.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to pass the baton back to you, Davida.
All right. So I think when we think of film festivals, we think of these stuffy judges who don't really get the work, when that's obviously not true, because you three are award-winning film festival producers. My question is, oftentimes the audience or the writers are coming from a different perspective. So Leah, let's start with you. Having won ABFF, which is a film festival for Black creators, what was it about the project that spoke to you and that made you feel that it would speak to the festival judges as well?
Oh, so that was a very well. So 25 to Life was about a young man who kept his HIV status a secret for 25 years, and then went on a radio station and publicly disclosed. And he had gone to Howard and had been known to be very promiscuous while he was there, and so it ran ripples through the community. What drew me to that project was and so the film charted not only that disclosure and everything that happened, but also where he was in his life at that point, married, trying to have a kid, had started a foundation for young people who tested positive, and we're dealing with some of those issues. And that's sort of the world of the film. What drew me to it was the simple question of, how would I feel if something that I did at 19 was how I was defined for the rest of my life, right? Where do we have room to sort of make mistakes and grow? And are some mistakes not mistakes you can actually, be separated from? When we made that film, we made a couple decisions about, because we had gotten into other festivals and we had gotten interest from other distributors when the film was ready. And what we did, Kalia Neal was my producing partner on that. And some of you may know her. She produced Last Black Man in San Francisco, P-Valley, which is like my favorite show right now. She and I did that film together, and it was both of our first films. And she had gone to Howard. And so what we made a decision with that particular project was to do all Black everything all day. So we went with a Black distributor, we went with a Black film festival, we went with Black, like we just, made that decision as two Black women having our first sort of stab at the pie where we get to actually make decisions and be in the driver's seat. We wanted to double down on everything that was. And so I think that it spoke to that particular festival because it was so much about the community of that festival. It was a Howard story, but it was also a story about how Black people, their relationship to HIV and AIDS, and also where we have thought about the 80s and the Ryan Whites of the world, who I had the privilege of actually speaking to his mother just to clear a clip, for the film. And I grew up, studying, watching how mean people were on TV, to him on TV. But we didn't have a story that actually talked about what Black life was like in the 80s for us coming up through that process. So that was sort of why we went there, and also why we think the film connected so much with both the judges and the audience that came to see us screen.
Wow. So Kate, you mentioned, obviously we've talked about AFI, but you also mentioned South by Southwest. Can you talk a little bit about your festival runs there and ways you were able to network and ways the festival helped you as a producer?
Yeah, I think, you get something a little bit different from every festival, and I can speak to South by a little bit. Yeah, I think sorry, I'm just like trying to be, this year, I'm just sad about festivals, you guys. I'm sorry, because it really is, when you go, you have that experience of meeting other collaborators and getting to celebrate each other's work. And I think all festivals really care about their filmmakers, and they all offer something different, a different audience. And I think that's what's so important about is researching the festivals before you do submit. Look back at previous years of what films have gone to find out where your audience where your audience is. And that's where you're going to get the most support from that festival, because they know the audience of how to get your film out and get it appreciated. I don't know, does that answer your question?
That's definitely helpful. Thank
Okay.
you so much. And yes, it answers the question. So last but not least on this topic, Miss Speaks, when we talk about Jen, Jen was everywhere. I had heard so much about Jen before it was any place I could see it. So my question is, obviously it hit an emotional core. It just touched so many people in so many ways. But when you were first reading it, you also have to wear the hat of producer, which it comes down to money and marketability. What was it about that project that you knew this was the one that you had to produce, and then that you knew it would make such a statement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I first read Jen, there was so many things. It was interesting because I really related to the story tremendously, because I didn't grow up Muslim, but I grew up, in a Christian home, and, had the same struggles that Summer was going through. And like, you have this, you have your parents over here who are saying you have to do this, but then it's like, you go to school and like, just, in life as a teenager, you want to just go to parties and like do your thing, And so I really related to Summer's character, and that struggle, and that coming of age story was something that I really related to. I also related to Jade's character as well, because, I had my own, when I was in my 20s, I had my own kind of like religious transformation, was trying to convert everybody, and, and it was like going at it, much like Jade, and then had to kind of come to a realization for myself of just like, how to navigate that in a way that, is still accepting of other people. And so I related so much to the story, and that in and of itself was, made me go like, this is something that I really want to do and that I have to do. But I also think that dynamic was what made me know that this is going to be something, was because she wrote it from such a specific place. Najla Movement, who's the writer director of the film, she wrote it from such a specific place. And I don't think I ever in my life felt so seen by her story. And I was like, to me, that speaks something about the universality of what she had written. And so I knew that there was something there. And so even in us taking the film out, and, I mentioned that, kind of my heartbeat is telling these unique stories, and like, just uncovering these like, multi-dimensional stories. I think way too often, like, especially when it comes to, Black people on the screen, we only get, this one dimension, we only get like, two-dimensional characters, whatever. But this was like such a vivid, these are such vivid characters, and this was a world that, people had never seen before. And I just felt like that would capture people's attention, and that it was different and it was bold. And, with that film, just in one sentence alone, like when we would pitch it, we would just say, Jen is a story about a teenage girl whose life changes when her mother converts to Islam. And that sentence alone was like, oh, like people would be so interested and intrigued. And even in pitching it, realizing how many people just, which was crazy to me, like people didn't even know that there were Black Muslims. It's like, what? And we'd pitch it and people would be like, oh, you mean Nation of Islam? Like, no, not Nation of Islam. Like, there are other Muslims that exist, and there are Black people that are. So it was just really interesting that this was like a whole new world for some people. And I think that was, the appeal of it. And so I think we both saw it. And I think also Nigel and I both came from an education background. So, I taught on the college level. I also taught high school as well. Nigel was teaching at an after school program at the time that we connected. So we both had this, this interest in education and in youth, and really wanted to tell this story about this young girl, because we both had that affinity for like young people, and just really wanted to see this movie happen. by any means necessary at any cost. So we knew we didn't have a lot. We didn't have a lot of money. And so we just kind of set off on the path, and we're just like, we're just going to do this. Yeah. And that's a whole story in and of itself, but it all started there, just with both of us, or me, in terms of my own journey, sitting down with that story and finding myself in it, in so many facets, and like in so many characters. I could see myself in those people, and I just knew I had to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I think we're gonna go into our last question before we go into our next segment. So I think this is one of the most important questions, because we're all dealing with this right now. COVID has hit, our business so hard, and things are changing rapidly. We're not sure like what the actual is gonna look like. And films like Tenet, have been like impacted. So, considering all these things that are happening, what are the changes that you've seen innovatively with, producing, distribution, and specifically, Avril, with your work focusing on, Black stories, and, how has this affected, your workflow, going forward? I just saw recently, it was announced, we talked about this, I think, maybe a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago, but you're starting a new, docu-series, and, you're consistently, working, and just how do, we as, filmmakers, people of color, women, unheard voices, continue to thrive in this very challenging time?
Yeah, that's a great question. It definitely has brought up some challenges. I have like 3 projects right now that have all been affected by COVID in different ways. I have a film that I was in production on in March that got shut down when COVID happened, and then we had to kind of ramp back up and pick up production again back in August. And that creates an interesting challenge with like, how do we do production in this time. And so it's been a lot of learning about COVID and protocols, and calls with SAG, and trying to figure out like what can we do there. I think what's been interesting production wise has been just the way that I've seen crews adapt, and seeing filmmakers adapt and think of, how can we, reduce our crew size, for example, and what are some innovative ways that we can adjust how we film. The docuseries that you mentioned, that's a question that we're talking about now, is how are we going to shoot this, especially for it to be like, we're doing these interviews, and they're like these intimate interviews, and you want to be like, interact with the people that you interview, and we're not going to be able to do that. And so just thinking of innovative ways. I think I've seen a lot of just really just creative things that people have done in terms of like, directing over Zoom. I know some people have done that, or have been doing that, is an option. Like I said, reducing crews has been another thing as well. I have another film that was released this fall, which our approach originally for that film was to do a very, kind of grassroots, community oriented type of release for it. And so it was going to be centered around doing like community group screenings and, that kind of thing. And now we can't do that because of COVID. And so everything has turned digital, and we're doing a lot of Zoom screenings and a lot of, Zoom talkbacks and things like that, and partnerships with different organizations, and getting them to sponsor, and then we'll come on and do the Zoom chat afterwards. So we're really having to adjust and adapt and think about how do we, on both ends, on the production end, how do we make the film, in the midst of these challenges, but also how do we distribute the film, and how do we get audiences to see it in a world where we can't gather like we used to. But yeah, it's been a really interesting challenge of trying to meet those demands, and and figure it out. And like I said, I think we've found some cool ways, some interesting ways. I'll look forward to when we get back to our normal way of doing things, but for now it's like, we got to do what we got to do and keep going. So that's where we are.
Thank you for that deep share, that deep dive. Kate, what are the ways you think the industry shutdown has benefited us, and what ways has it been detrimental?
I think the benefits have been actually access in a way, because you're able to connect. People are kind of thinking differently now. They're like, oh, well, if we're all going to be on a Zoom, let's all be on a Zoom. And people who were in the office and driving, now you can have more meetings in a day, and now you can talk to that Australian filmmaker who might have not been available. And I think embracing the technology has been the biggest advantage, because people are seeing how easy it is to have those meetings that you might have had to have waited a couple weeks to have. Now you can have it. I think detrimental, it's the person-to-person contact. That for me has been the biggest thing. Of, I've met my collaborators just from that random karaoke party, and you're like, oh, you're a cool person, I want to hang out with you, I want to hang out with you on set. Great, let's do something. That sort of interaction, I think, is the biggest loss.
Thank you for that share. Leah, how has this affected, like the projects that you're working with emerging, filmmakers, in terms of building, like how do people, create networks and pipelines now? And any thoughts on how we can, do this all together coming out of COVID?
Yeah, well, so I'll say that I found myself in an odd position when COVID hit, because I wasn't on the fringes. I wasn't sort of, for the first time as an artist, on the margins trying to figure out how to survive. I was lucky enough to have had a project that was actually going into the edit, so there was no more shooting. One of the films was coming out in release. The star of that, the character that we followed in that film, unfortunately passed from COVID, but that then lifted his story up even further, where the New York Times ended up doing an article all about him, where, the journey of that story was that he had been overlooked and in the shadow of Miles Davis for all this time. And then because of this happening, it sort of helped to bolster the story itself. And so the projects that I was working on, and a few others, I found myself in a very odd place of really understanding my own personal positionality. And I would say that the biggest thing that's had the largest impact on me during this time is just George Floyd. And that's actually been the thing, the defining moment of the last few months. It's not, yes, I miss my family. Yes, I'm home and by myself, but what are we going to be doing now that we're here, right? And for the first time, everybody else was home too, so that they got to see what we had been having a conversation about for a long time. So, as it relates to emerging artists, what I did with that positionality and realizing that I wasn't fighting for survival in this moment, where I had been for however long. If a festival had gone down before and I was expecting to sell a film at a festival, that would have devastated my income for the year, would have devastated my future prospects for the year coming up. I wasn't in that position. I was in a different position. And so I felt, how do I take that position and match that to what we know about where we are and how the world has been cracked open by hearing our voices actually for the first time. Not that they haven't been screaming, but like actually maybe for the first time hearing it. So what we've been doing is coalescing around equity. We've been coalescing around autonomy, and defining that, and constructing a new entity that I'm going to be excited to launch soon, that separates out this idea of who gets to be the gatekeeper and who gets to be the first in money and who gets to determine, Sundance was an amazing thing for me. It opened a million doors. But the biggest thing it did was to validate to someone else who I had already been talking to for 10 years that I actually was like worthwhile. Same me, same projects, same everything. But the fact that they paid attention to me as a person somehow made them now look at me differently. I reject that as a notion. I am happy for it, and Sundance is my family, and have been great to me. But we need our own family, and we need to be our own co-signers and our own gatekeepers and our own places of, hey, how did you get that first $50,000 to get that cast member, to get that, to get that prospectus together, to get that deck, to get all that other stuff? Come here, we'll do that, and get that out. So that's how I would say from the emerging, filmmaker pipeline structure, that's what we've been focused on. That's what I've been focused on. But yeah, no, for me, COVID was a happening, but George Floyd was an awakening.
Wow, man, you're keeping it so raw and real. I love it. All right, well, we're going to go into our next, section, quick little commercial. So recently, I became a board member of the Hollywood Radio Television Society. It's been around for like 70 years. There's a New York and LA chapter, and I know that we've been talking about mentorship. There is a section that's JHRTS, which is for assistants, coordinators, interns, and I think the fee for the year is like 60 or 70 bucks. And what that does is gives you access to networks, network execs, partners at the big talent agencies, all the talent agencies, and they have curated, conversations every month throughout the month. And it's a good way to be able to build a network. They do these virtual mixers right now, at least monthly, for JHRTS. And then this HRTS Associates, which is for, mid-level producers, talent, managers, which is great as well if you're a little bit further along your career. And then the last section is HRTS, which is really for studio heads, network, heads of networks. But I encourage, everyone to take a look at that. It's hrts.org. It's more, again, towards television. There are a lot of film people in there. And it's a great way to, again, get mentorship, access to build your network, meet with people that, probably you can't meet with right now, basically. So that's my little commercial. I do want to go into Johnny over at Chicken Bone. Johnny's become a friend and ally. His company did VFX for a proof of concept that we shot in LA back in June, and he has an amazing opportunity that he would like to share with all of you and give a little bit of background about his company, Chicken Bone. So without further ado, Johnny, if you can say hello and give a little breakdown about you, the company, and what VFX is and the opportunity.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you, Ramphis. It's great to be a part of this. I'm really humbled and honored to be a part of what the Parity Project is doing in the industry. I am CEO and Chief Creative of Chicken Bone Effects. We're a remote-based VFX business. We've been around since 2011. We have offices that operate in NYC and Los Angeles. The market in which we travel in the most is for television series, primarily for streaming platforms and some networks. We also do some feature work, but our focus is really television series for several of the major streaming platforms. The VFX industry is growing, and it's traditionally has been about 90+% post when we're talking about like what actual work is done inside of VFX. And more recently, and a lot more quickly than expected because of COVID, is sort of branching off into pre-production and production by way of virtual production pipelines, which we can talk about later. But the way that VFX traditionally operates is, we have a team of support personnel and a ton of artists pushing out a large number of shots for a show to make things that are fake look real. And so our internship opportunity is something, because we're a remote-based business, we can, for the most part, short of any limitations on how it's being set up, we can basically support interns from anywhere in the world. Our artists are all over the world right now. We do shows for LA and New York, but our artist base is everywhere. They're all over the United States. We have people, several people, support personnel and artists in other countries. And so our internship opportunity is kind of in kind with that idea and that workflow. So there's space kind of in the internship program to kind of see exactly what we do, how things are built, and see what kind of track, if you're interested in post-production, even if post in general and not necessarily specifically VFX, it may be a really good opportunity to be a part of, because it can give you access to and exposure to how the pipelines work, see how things are done creatively and logistically and technically. And the internship is sort of built from a technical perspective and brings people from the technical side into the producing side, into the artistic side, kind of from the ground up. And in some cases can even provide opportunity for employment afterward, employment from anywhere. So we're providing that, and we'd really love to see one or several of you all be a part of that process, so you can see how it works. And we're excited to be a part. Again, we're excited to be part of what the Parity Project is doing, and we hope to see some interest from some of you for this internship.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Like the Parity Project, all of us really do appreciate that so much. I think you'll have several people applying for that opportunity, but I really thank you for opening up this door, because it will help someone or some people become producers.
Absolutely.
Ramphis, Davida, are we ready to go to breakouts, or did we have more questions for Johnny?
Well, what I did want to say is that this opportunity is going to, Johnny, if you want to, talk about the hours and then expectations, and then when it opens up, just, fill in those gaps.
Sure, absolutely. It is between 15 and 20 hours per week. It can be part of a student program that you're already a part of, or it can be done independently of that. So it can be done as credit, or it's just for your education and edification, if you will. It is structured to work around a schedule, assuming that somebody is a student. So if someone wants to, kind of set their own hours or make a block of time every day that they want to be available, we can usually kind of work within that. Our operating procedures, our operating hours are either based out of New York or out of LA. So there may be certain limitations for those who are in the middle of the country if you're applying for something on either coast, in terms of like what a full day actually looks like. But we can be very flexible on the amount of hours, and there is kind of like an ongoing training opportunity inside of those hours, so you can learn and see how things are done, even participate and give feedback for the things that you see on screen. It's a highly visual thing, and also tends to be pretty technical too. Did I answer your questions, Ramphis?
Yeah, Ron, how are we accepting those applications? That's going through us, right?
I think, well, it's up to Johnny here, because people are wondering where to apply. But yeah, we want to make sure that anybody who's participated in the Parity Project can apply for this opportunity. So that's a question really for Johnny. How would you like to receive it?
Absolutely. I think our expectation is that they will come through the Parity Project, and then we will collect and review, and then do interviews from that point. We can, after you guys have taken the initial applications, we can take care of the interviews and make selections after that point.
Okay, so you could send your resumes and all that stuff to info@wewilldothis.com, or go through the website, go to wewilldothis.com, and you can find our contact information there.
Awesome, great. All right, well, to go into the next, section, Nicole Thompson will be, talking about that. Thank you, Nicole. I just want to give a little shout out to Nicole. She's a young filmmaker that just graduated out of USC, and she was highlighted as one of the rising filmmakers in Movie Maker. So excited to have, Nicole be part of our team here at the Parity Project. And without further ado, Nicole, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for being so informative. And thank you, Johnny, for sharing with us opportunities with Chicken Bone. So as we transition, next up, we will go into the break. And so this is how each of our guests will essentially be assigned to a break room, and all of the audience members will essentially, the guests will rotate. And essentially, the whole goal with this is so that you have a more intimate opportunity to talk with each of these leaders and discuss networking opportunities and any questions you may have. And it will begin with the audience entering the room. Each audience member will get 30 seconds to essentially introduce themselves. And then after that quick 30-second introduction from everyone that's in the room, our guest leader will have the Q&A to lead, and there will be 5 minutes to ask all the questions you might have. So get ready, guys, to get into those rooms, and that's gonna be a room for each of the panelists. And essentially, after the rooms are over, we're gonna come back here and have an opportunity to still mingle.